This is the Into the Paddock podcast.
We mentioned it in the first half that perhaps the race of the weekend. No, fuck it. The race of the weekend. Perhaps even the race of the season. I genuinely feel this way. Was the WEC's second round of the season, the 6 Hours of Imola. Now, I enter this event biased because Imola is perhaps one of my favourite tracks in the entire world. I think it's a fucking outstanding racetrack. And then a couple of weeks ago, me and a couple of our teammates did the 6 hours on iRacing, and that kind of opened the eyes to it was going to be a bit of a hectic race because of how the multi-class was working around there. We were right about that. What we hadn't neglected, or what we had neglected to factor in, was whether it would rain or not. And it did in the real race. And man, did it put on a show. I think not only was this the race of the weekend, genuinely I think it was the race of the season.
Yeah, this race had everything. It had lap 1, turn 1 wrecks. It had rain. It had strategy. It had drama. This race had it all. So if you were a fan of just, another slow burner strategy, tension, action, thriller, this was the race for you. And it lasted for 6 hours, so we definitely all needed to see our doctors afterwards.
God.
I think this was the best officiated race of the year, because normally, like, if we watch an IMSA race, it's starting to rain, they'll throw a yellow for a car going off on the gravel trap. Eduardo Freitas and his team this weekend at Imola called everything to perfection. I really loved the full course yellow use for any car that went off track. It's just a temporary 1 to 2 lap, coach 60 essentially. They get the crane out there to put the car back on track, send them back going to green, and they didn't call any unnecessary full course yellows, and it really helped the race continue to flow naturally instead of the full on interruptions we typically get with IMSA races. And then also just the quality of the drivers, going out on slick tires, and the whole third sector of the track was wet in these hypercars with no mechanical grip, and they're going off track a lot, but they're keeping it on track for the most part in a multi-class environment. I mean, this was peak racing. This is the pinnacle of motorsport action and skill on display. Changeable conditions, multi-class racing, strategic tomfoolery going about, and you're racing against people who will throw their grandmother under a bus for a dub. Like this race was really enjoyable to watch. The 6 hours flew by, but I got more enjoyment out of this race than I have the entire F1 season, both this year and last year. Like this was just incredible. I know there wasn't a lot of on track passing necessarily between the hypercars themselves, but everything else that was going into the race and not knowing who was going to win until the very end was still enthralling to me. It was great seeing how people had to manage traffic and the conditions and the strategy. It's just like, I don't know what else you want other than like a super big pass fest, but this was just about as good as it gets for racing, and I can't wait for more to come through this year. But again, this is all Formula One rejects, graduating to sports car racing.
It was an absolutely stunning race, and I could not agree with you more. This is the pinnacle of motorsport, as Greg said in the first half with endurance sports car multi-class racing. This is where it's at. This is where the talent is unreal. I not to put a downer on the quality of the drivers in Formula One. I'm sure that if they came over and did this, they would be very good at it. I mean, look at Fernando Alonso when he came over, took to it like a duck to water. But this is where drivers really get to showcase everything, because not only are they racing each other, they're racing the conditions, they're racing the clock, for racing for such long distances. They're racing the track conditions, they're racing the other cars, dicing through traffic. You've got wildly different strategies that everyone's trying to wrap their heads around for all the times. You've got tires that are doing like 108 laps. Pirelli could never.
Yeah.
it was just, I've said before that I was a little bit late to the sports car party. I didn't whenever I watched WEC, about 5 years ago or so, it was in an era where it wasn't so good. Um, but watching this race, it's the most excited I've been by a sports car race, particularly from World Endurance. It was just 6 hours of non-stop action, and it was absolutely fantastic. And I urge anyone who is of the opinion that Formula One is the pinnacle, as they claim themselves to be, to watch World Endurance. I get that it's long races and that no one has an attention span anymore, and that even to watch a TikTok video, they have to put footage of Subway surfers underneath to keep you entertained. But there is no better racing right now than in sports cars, and perhaps no better racing than in the World Endurance Championship, which is mad for me to say.
Yeah.
I never thought we'd get to the point where IMSA would be outclassed by World Endurance. But so far this
No.
season, it has been.
Yeah, I agree completely. And like going back to the degree of difficulty, we know all these drivers are darn freaking good, but we know how difficult this race was because we had the drivers the likes of Raffaele Marciello, we had Matt Campbell, Kevin Estra, the Ferrari factory drivers. They all went and flew off the track multiple times because the conditions were that difficult. What makes some of the racing exciting is just seeing these people who are at the top of their profession struggle to do the basic thing of getting their car around the track. We see it all the time in other series, like, yeah, I'll compare it to F1. Like, oh, it's really wet, challenging conditions. Like, well, they're still just moseying around 5 seconds away from everybody. But in this, they're struggling to keep it on the track while passing GTs. So the Ferrari get its doors blown off by a Corvette GT3 car because it was his tires are cold, and he's just flying off in the first turn. Like this is I, I really can't express how much I've enjoying sports car racing. Like you, I thought IMSA would never be outclassed by WEC because WEC had super low car count in the top class and the BOP was a joke. But like we're seeing as time goes along that this convergence formula, this performance envelope that all the hypercars are put into to make it a whole lot more fair, but still allow different cars to have different strengths. It's working. It's really working. Arguably better than in IMSA right now, even though both championships are freaking great right now. And again, we haven't even touched the GTs yet. That this top class is so enthralling right now. Like I hope we can continue the streak for sports car racing to continue to be the true pinnacle of motorsports, not just in terms of on-track action, which is fantastic and all you want from motorsports, but also the applicable technologies that's being developed with all the different power units, all the different hybrid systems, two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, extending the fuel, extending the tires, like all of the skill and technology that's going into it, and the scrutineering behind the scenes for it to keep it all fair and budgets and control. That can only prolong it and make it better. So I this is the best run FIA series right now.
I completely agree, 100% on every metric. The racing is phenomenal. The variety on the grid, you touched on it there with the technology that goes on in World Endurance and the open regulations where the teams are able to run different engines, different body styles, everything. The BOP is really, really good at the moment. We'll wait and see what happens at Le Mans because there's usually some shenanigans around there, but whatever. That's just, you can't make everything perfect.
Yeah.
But the fact that you've got all these wildly different cars competing so equally at the moment, and it's we've often heard one of the things that World Endurance has had suggested is whether they should run sprint races to try and cater for the people that don't like watching these long races. This race proved that that can never happen, because if you do a sprint race, then there will be one car that dominates it, because there is usually one car or a couple of cars that are very good at the start of a stint on a short run. It's only when you allow a race to play out for its full duration that the BOP really comes into effect, because BOP isn't just about pace, it's about fuel, it's about tire management. They take in the fact that it's an endurance race and balance them over the course of an endurance race. You can't balance them over the form of a sprint race, because then it will only favor the cars that fire off really quickly, like the Ferrari.
Yeah.
So this race proved that the FIA WEC is the king of endurance racing, and endurance racing is possibly the king of motorsport right now.
This is the Into the Paddock podcast.